In 1957, more than 60 of the most powerful mafia bosses in America drove to a quiet farmhouse in upstate New York for a secret summit. Waiting for them were hundreds of pounds of steak, prosciutto, and aged provolone. They never got to eat a bite. State troopers raided the place, and men in silk suits ran through the woods, clutching their wingtips. Today, people think mobsters ate at fancy restaurants every night. The truth is stranger. Number 14 on this list was a weed pulled from vacant lots, and capos demanded it anyway. Number 3 was cooked in a prison cell with a razor blade. These 30 foods built an empire of blood and pasta. Hit that subscribe button and let us count down the 30 shocking foods the 5 families actually ate. Number 30, lupini beans. Before the made men had pinky rings and Cadillacs, they had a jar of lupini beans soaking on the windowsill. These flat yellow beans came over from Sicily in burlap sacks, and raw, they were so bitter they were almost poisonous. The trick was patience. You soaked them in salted water for a full week, changing it 2 times a day, until the bitterness leached out and the beans turned firm and buttery. A pound cost almost nothing at the grocer on Mulberry Street. Men sat at card tables in the back of social clubs, popping the skins off with their teeth and spitting them on the floor while they played briscola for hours. The salt made you thirsty for wine, which was the point. A bowl of lupini and a glass of homemade red was how a wise guy killed an afternoon doing nothing the law could ever prove. Number 29, peppers and eggs. This was the sandwich that fueled the early morning cruise. Long Italian frying peppers, sliced thin, softened slowly in olive oil until they collapsed into something sweet. Then eggs cracked right into the same pan and scrambled together. Stuffed inside a length of crusty Italian bread, it traveled. Dock workers, button men, and bookies carried peppers and eggs in their coat pockets, wrapped in butcher paper, eating it cold in a parked car while they watched a number spot. A dozen eggs ran about 60 cents in the 1950s. The whole sandwich cost less than a subway token and kept a man full through an entire shift of dirty work. It made no mess, needed no fork, and the grease soaking into the bread only made it better by the second hour. Friday during Lent, when meat was off the table, peppers and eggs became dinner for the whole family. Number 28, bacala. Salt cod was survival food that the families never abandoned, even when they had real money. Stiff as a board and packed in salt, bacala could hang in a pantry for a year without spoiling, which mattered to people who remembered being hungry in the old country. You soaked it for 3 days in cold water until the flesh softened and the salt washed out. Then it was stewed with tomatoes, onions, olives, and capers, or battered and fried in golden chunks. A piece of bacala cost a fraction of fresh fish, yet carried a deep, oceanic flavor that fresh cod never had. On Christmas Eve, it was the centerpiece. But on an ordinary Tuesday, it was just what frugal men ate. Men who had killed for territory but still refused to pay full price for fish. Number 27, escarole and beans. Here is a dish that cost about 30 cents and showed up on the tables of men worth millions. A head of bitter escarole, chopped and wilted in olive oil with a mountain of sliced garlic. Then cannellini beans, stirred in with a ladle of their own starchy liquid. Salt, pepper, crushed red pepper, and a heel of bread to soak the bottom of the bowl. That was the entire recipe. The bitterness of the greens cut against the creamy beans in a way that felt almost luxurious, even though every ingredient was the cheapest thing in the store. This was the meal a soldier ate at his mother's table on a night he could not be seen anywhere fancy, the meal that reminded him where he came from before the suits and the cars and the funerals. Number 26, sopressata. Every basement in the neighborhood had it hanging from the rafters, dark red cylinders of cured pork wrapped in netting. dripping slowly over a sheet of newspaper. Soppressata was made in winter when the family slaughtered a pig, the meat hand-cut, seasoned hard with black pepper, fennel, and wine, stuffed into casings, and hung to age for months in the cool dark. A man's soppressata was a point of pride. When a capo cut a few slices off his own homemade sausage and laid them on the table for you, that was respect. That was him saying you were family. Store-bought salami was for tourists. The good stuff never touched a shelf. It moved hand to hand, hung in cellars next to the wine barrels, and sometimes next to things never meant to see daylight. Number 25, stuffed artichokes. Patience was the secret ingredient. Whole globe artichokes were trimmed of their thorns, the leaves pried open one by one, and every gap was packed with seasoned breadcrumbs, grated cheese, garlic, and parsley bound with olive oil. Then the whole artichoke was stood upright in a pot with an inch of water and steamed for nearly an hour until the leaves pulled away tender. You ate it slowly, scraping the stuffing and the soft flesh off each leaf with your teeth, working down to the prized heart at the bottom. This was not fast food. It was a dish for men who controlled the docks, but still sat for 2 hours pulling apart a vegetable, leaf by leaf, talking business between bites where no microphone could ever follow. Number 24, fried smelts. When fresh fish was needed but money or appearances demanded humility, the answer was a paper bag full of smelts. These tiny silverfish were dredged whole in seasoned flour, head, bones, and all, then dropped into screaming hot oil until they crisped into golden sticks you ate with your fingers. A squeeze of lemon, a pinch of salt, and that was it. A pound of smelts cost almost nothing at the Fulton Fish Market, which the families happened to control through the unions for decades. Men ate them by the platter at the social clubs, washing them down with cold white wine. The crunch of the little fish bones somehow part of the pleasure. No waste, no fillet, no fuss. Just the cheapest fish in the harbor turned into something that disappeared faster than anyone could cook it. Number 23, tripe. This is the one that makes people flinch. Trippa was the lining of a cow's stomach, scrubbed white, then simmered for hours in tomato sauce with garlic and a heavy hand of grated Romano until it turned tender and soaked up everything around it. The texture was springy, almost spongy, and it carried the flavor of the sauce like nothing else. Tripe was butcher's garbage, the part rich people threw away, which is exactly why immigrant families learned to love it. Old-timers who ran numbers and ran men ordered tripe in restaurants on purpose, partly because they loved it, partly to prove they had not forgotten the hard years. A bowl of trippa on a winter Sunday was a statement. It said money never made them soft, and it never would. Number 22, pasta e fagioli. The neighborhood called it pasta fazool, and it was the engine that powered the whole operation. Small pasta cooked right into a pot of beans and tomato until the whole thing thickened into something between a soup and a stew, rich with olive oil and garlic, and a Parmesan rind melted into the bottom. A bowl of this filled a working man for an entire day and cost maybe 20 cents. Dried beans were the cheapest protein in America, and a half box of leftover pasta finished the job. This was the meal that fed a crew before a long night, the meal a boss's wife had simmering whenever men dropped by unannounced, which they always did. It reheated better the second day, and it tasted like the inside of every Italian kitchen from Mott Street to Bensonhurst. Number 21, scungeli. Conch meat, sliced thin and stewed in spicy tomato sauce, was a delicacy that came straight out of the old country and never left the Sunday table. Scungeli was tough as rubber if you rushed it, so it simmered for hours until it surrendered into something tender and sweet, swimming in a fra diavolo sauce hot enough to make your forehead sweat. You ate it over linguine or scooped it onto bread. It was sold cheap in every Italian market because nobody else in America wanted it. To the families, that was the appeal. They ate the parts of the sea other Americans feared and turned them into feasts, saving a fortune doing it. A platter of scungili fra diavolo at a christening meant the host knew how to treat his guests. Number 17. Meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. Here is where the truth about mob food gets interesting. None of this was about money, not really. These men could buy any meal in New York. So why were they eating tripe and weeds and the cheapest fish in the harbor? Because food was the one thing the law could never touch. A federal agent could tap your phone, follow your car, flip your associates, and seize your books. But he could not arrest you for a bowl of beans, the social club kitchen, the Sunday table, the back room of the restaurant. These were the only places a wise guy could speak freely. Business was done over food because food was sacred and silent. The meals stayed humble on purpose. A boss eating the same escarole his mother ate was a boss who could never be accused of forgetting his people. The plate was a promise. Number 20. Mussels. A steaming pot of kotze was a feast that cost almost nothing. Black mussels were scrubbed and tossed into a pan with white wine, garlic, parsley, and olive oil, then steamed just until they popped open, releasing their briny liquor into a broth you mopped up with bread until the bowl was clean. Mussels were so cheap they were practically free at the docks, the family's own territory. Men sat for hours over a mountain of empty shells, using one shell as a pincer to pull the meat from the next, talking low while the broth went cold. It was messy and communal and impossible to do in a hurry, which made it perfect for a long conversation that needed to happen far from anyone listening. Number 19. Calamari. Fried calamari was the appetizer that defined the Sunday gravy table, but the families ate squid every way imaginable. Rings dredged in flour and flash fried until golden. Whole bodies stuffed with breadcrumbs and braised slowly in red sauce until tender. Squid was dirt cheap, often thrown in free with a fish order because most Americans had no idea what to do with it. The immigrants did. They turned a slimy, ink-stained mess into one of the most beloved dishes on the table. A platter of fried calamari with a bowl of marinara was the first thing to hit a celebration spread, and it vanished in minutes. The crunch, the lemon, the salt. It was the taste of every wedding and christening the neighborhood ever threw, and it cost the host next to nothing to feed an army. Number 18. Octopus. Polpo took skill that few outside the families ever bothered to learn. Raw octopus is tough enough to bounce off a plate, so the old women had tricks. They simmered it with a wine cork in the pot, froze it first, anything to break down the muscle. Done right, it came out tender and sweet, dressed simply with olive oil, lemon, garlic, and parsley in a cold salad, or charred over flame until the edges crisped. Octopus was a throwaway catch that fishermen could barely give away, which meant it landed on immigrant tables for pennies. To the families, a perfectly tender octopus salad was proof of a kitchen run by someone who knew the old ways, elegant and nearly free, the exact combination these men prized above almost everything else. Number 17. Braciole. This was the showstopper, hidden inside the Sunday gravy. Thin slices of cheap, tough beef were pounded flat, then layered with breadcrumbs, garlic, parsley, raisins, pine nuts, and cheese, rolled up tight, tied with string, and dropped into the tomato sauce to simmer for hours. The cheap cut became fork tender as it cooked, soaking up the sauce while flavoring it in return. Braciole was how you fed a crowd a meat dish without buying expensive meat. A boss's wife made a dozen of them from a few pounds of bottom round, the kind of cut nobody wanted. Cutting into a braciole at the table, watching the spiral of filling unroll, was one of the great pleasures of the Sunday meal. Whoever got the braciole knew they were valued at that table. Number 16. Sausage and peppers. The smell of it could empty a street. Italian sausage links browned in a pan, then bell peppers and onions tumbled in to soften and caramelize in the rendered fat until everything turned sweet and slick. Piled onto a torpedo roll, it was the sandwich of every feast, every street festival, every San Gennaro celebration where the families ran the games and the booths and quietly skimmed the take. Homemade sausage cost a fraction of butcher prices, and peppers were cheap by the bushel in late summer. This was food made to be eaten standing up, in a crowd, with grease running down your wrist. It fed hundreds at a festival for almost nothing, and made everyone feel taken care of. Generosity with cheap food was the oldest trick in the book, and they were masters of it. Number 15. Eggplant Parmigiana. When meat was scarce or money was tight, eggplant did the heavy lifting. Slices were salted to draw out the bitterness, breaded, fried golden, then layered with tomato sauce and mozzarella, and baked until bubbling. The result was so rich and satisfying that nobody at the table missed the meat. A single eggplant cost a few cents and could feed a family of 6. Vegetarian by accident rather than design, eggplant parm became a Friday staple during Lent and a year-round favorite for households stretching a budget. The families ate it the same as the laborers did, because it was simply that good. It looked like effort and abundance on the plate, but the truth was it came from the cheapest vegetable at the market, transformed by patience into something that felt like a holiday. Second pattern break. Here is something the movies always get wrong. They show the mob eating in red sauce restaurants with white tablecloths, and that did happen, but the real eating was at home, in the kitchen, with the women in charge. Behind every boss who controlled a piece of New York was a wife, a mother, a grandmother who controlled the stove, and there she was, the absolute authority. The men who terrified the city sat down and ate exactly what they were served. The recipes were never written down. They lived in the hands and the memory of women who learned them from women who learned them in villages across the sea. When one of those women died, a piece of the family died with her. Recipes no one would ever taste again. The kitchen outranked the social club. It was the one room where the toughest man still answered to his mother. Number 14. Dandelion greens. Here is the dish that even broke immigrants were ashamed of, and the bosses ate it anyway. Cicoria, wild dandelion and chicory greens, was foraged from empty lots, roadsides, and the edges of cemeteries by old women with paper bags. It cost nothing because it grew like a weed, because it was a weed. The bitter greens were boiled, then sautéed hard in olive oil with garlic and red pepper until the bitterness mellowed into something deep and almost medicinal. Wealthy Americans would have been horrified that men running the most powerful crime families in the country sat down to a plate of picked weeds. But to the immigrants, cicoria was the taste of the old country, the taste of surviving when there was truly nothing. A man who remembered hunger was a man you never crossed. Number 13. Veal cutlets. When the family wanted to eat like the family, the answer was veal. Thin cutlets, pounded paper thin, breaded, and fried in olive oil until golden and crisp, served with nothing but a lemon wedge, or smothered in sauce and cheese as veal parmigiana. Veal was one of the few genuinely expensive things on the menu, which is exactly why it appeared at the important meals, the sit-downs, the celebrations, the dinners where alliances were made and broken. Cutting into a perfect veal cutlet signaled that this was an occasion that mattered. The simplicity was the luxury. A great cutlet needed nothing but good meat, good oil, and a cook who knew exactly when to pull it from the pan. Among men who hid their wealth in everything else, the veal was the one place they let the money show. Number 12. Pasta con le sarde. This Sicilian dish carried the whole island in one bowl. pasta tossed with fresh sardines, wild fennel, raisins, pine nuts, saffron, and breadcrumbs toasted in olive oil instead of cheese. The combination of sweet and savory and fishy was unlike anything else in Italian-American cooking, and it marked a family as Sicilian to the bone. Sardines were among the cheapest fish in the sea, and the wild fennel was foraged for free. Yet the finished dish tasted complex and ancient, the breadcrumbs standing in for cheese, the way poor people had done for centuries. For the oldest Sicilian families, the ones who ran the most serious operations, pasta con le sarde was a direct line back to Palermo, a dish you served to people you trusted and only to people you trusted. Number 11, wedding soup. Despite the name, this had nothing to do with weddings. The Italian phrase meant the marriage of meat and greens, and that is exactly what it was. Tiny meatballs no bigger than a marble, simmered with escarole or spinach in a clear chicken broth, finished with pasta and a snow of grated cheese. Rolling those hundreds of little meatballs by hand was an all-day job, usually done by the women and children together at the kitchen table. It used scraps of ground meat and cheap greens and turned them into something that felt rich and restorative. This was the soup that appeared when someone was sick, when a baby was christened, when the weather turned cold. A pot of it on the stove meant the household was running the way it should, and it tasted like being cared for. Number 17, meatloaf with tomato glaze and green beans. Here is what nobody outside the life understood. The bigger a man got in the families, the simpler he wanted to eat. The young guys, the wannabes, they wanted the steakhouses and the imported champagne, the flashy meals that got them noticed. The old bosses knew that getting noticed was how you ended up dead or in prison. The smartest, most powerful men in the underworld ate at home, ate cheap, ate the same things their fathers ate, and never drew attention to a single thing they did. The food was a discipline. It kept them humble, and it kept them invisible. A man flaunting his money with extravagant meals was telling the world he had something to flaunt. A man eating a bowl of beans was a man the government had nothing on. In that world, the plate in front of you said everything about how long you intended to live. Number 10. Espresso and anisette. No deal was ever finished without it. Thick black espresso pulled from a stovetop pot, poured into tiny cups, with a bottle of anisette or sambuca set on the table for the men to spike their coffee or take alongside it. The espresso kept them sharp through the long nights of cards and conversation. The anise liqueur signaled that the serious business was done, and the relaxing had begun. A little dish of espresso, a sugar cube soaked in liqueur, 3 coffee beans floating in the sambuca for luck. These were the rituals that closed every meeting. The coffee was always made at home, in the back of the social club, far from any waiter who might overhear and repeat. The cup of espresso was the period at the end of the sentence. Number 9. Stuffed peppers. A whole bell pepper became a meal that fed a man for a fraction of the cost of meat. The pepper was cored and packed with ground beef, rice, tomato, onion, and cheese, then baked standing up in a dish with sauce until the pepper softened and the filling set. The rice doubled the volume of the meat for pennies, and the pepper itself became the bowl, so there was almost nothing to wash. It looked generous, like a real plate of food, but the actual cost was tiny. This was weeknight dinner in households where the man of the house might be running a numbers racket or a loan sharking operation, but the family still stretched 1 pound of beef across 6 people. Abundance on the surface, frugality underneath. That was the whole philosophy of the kitchen, served upright on a plate. Number 8. Mozzarella and ricotta. Fresh cheese was made by hand, often that same morning, and nothing from a store ever compared. Mozzarella was pulled and stretched while still warm, sold in soft white balls, swimming in their own milky water, eaten within hours of being made, because that was when it was perfect. Ricotta, soft and sweet, went into the pasta, the cannoli, the cheesecake, and got spread on bread with a drizzle of honey for the children. The neighborhood cheese shop was a fixture, and the families often had a hand in the dairy supply chain, which meant they ate the very best of it for the very least. Tearing into a still warm ball of mozzarella with a piece of bread and a ripe tomato was, for many of these men, the single greatest pleasure money could not exactly buy, because the freshest cheese was never for sale to outsiders at all. Number 7. Cannoli, the most famous dessert in the underworld, immortalized by a single line about leaving the gun and taking the cannoli. A crisp fried shell, blistered with bubbles, piped full of sweetened ricotta studded with chocolate chips and candied citrus, dusted with powdered sugar. The genius was that the shell stayed crunchy only if it was filled at the last minute, so a good baker filled them to order. Cannoli were the dessert of every celebration, carried home in white boxes tied with string from the Italian bakery on the corner. The same bakery that had been there for generations and sometimes laundered more than just money. A tray of fresh cannoli at the end of a Sunday meal was the sweetest punctuation a family could ask for, and it told every guest they were honored. Number 6. Sfogliatelle. If the cannoli was the people's dessert, the sfogliatelle was the artist's. Hundreds of paper-thin layers of dough wrapped into a shell shape, filled with a sweet ricotta and semolina cream scented with orange and cinnamon, baked until the layers shattered like glass. Making them was so difficult that almost no home cook attempted it, which is why these came from the bakery, and only from the best ones. Biting into a fresh sfogliatelle, feeling the layers crackle and the warm cream spill out, was a small religious experience. These were the pastries set out for the most important guests on the most important days. Serving them said the host had gone to the bakery that mattered and considered you worth the best the neighborhood could produce. Number 5. Zeppole. Fried dough was the food of the festivals, and the festivals were the family's kingdom. Balls of simple dough dropped into hot oil, fried until golden and hollow, then rolled in powdered sugar while still hot enough to burn your fingers. At the San Gennaro feast in Little Italy, the smell of frying zeppole hung over every block. Sold from booths the families ran or taxed, the powdered sugar drifting through the air like snow. The dough cost almost nothing. The oil was reused all day. The markup was enormous, and the cash was beautifully untraceable, which was the entire point of running the feast in the first place. But beyond the money, a hot zeppole eaten on a crowded street on a warm September night was pure joy, and everyone, from the boss to the smallest child, ate them with the same delight. Number 4. The Sunday meatballs. Not the gravy itself, but the meatballs that lived in it. Ground beef, pork, and veal mixed with breadcrumbs soaked in milk, eggs, garlic, parsley, and grated cheese, rolled by hand and fried before they ever touched the sauce. The milk-soaked bread was the secret, the same trick poor cooks everywhere used to stretch precious meat and keep it tender. 1 pound of meat became 2 dozen meatballs that fed a whole table. Every family swore theirs were the best, and arguments about whose mother made better meatballs could last decades. There was always one cook who could not stop tasting them straight from the pan before they made it to the pot. A perfect meatball was soft, never dense, falling apart at the touch of a fork. It was the heart of the meal, built almost entirely from things that cost next to nothing. Number 3. Prison sauce. When the family went away, the family kept cooking. Behind bars, the most senior men ran their own kitchens, and the legend of the razor blade garlic is true to the spirit of it. Garlic was sliced so impossibly thin that it dissolved into the oil and liquefied in the pan, so a little went a very long way in a place where everything was scarce. Onions and tomatoes traded from the commissary, a little oil, dried herbs, and pasta, cooked in whatever pot could be improvised. Men who had eaten like kings on the outside hunched over a contraband hot plate, building a tomato sauce that tasted like home, and refusing, even in a concrete cell, to eat the way the system wanted them to eat. The meal was defiance. It said the bars could hold the man, but they could never take the kitchen out of him. Number 2. The Feast of the 7 Fishes. On Christmas Eve, the entire underworld stopped, and every Italian family in New York sat down to the same enormous meal. La Vigilia, the Feast of the 7 Fishes. No meat by old tradition, just course after course of seafood, often far more than 7 dishes. Bacala, calamari, smelts, mussels, scungili, eel, shrimp, octopus, clams, all the cheap and humble seafood of the year transformed into a banquet. Ingredient by ingredient, it cost remarkably little, but together it looked like the wealth of the sea poured out. This was the one night even sworn enemies stayed home with their families. The one night the whole machinery of the city's crime went quiet. The fish was cheap. The meaning was priceless. It was the night that reminded these men before anything else they were sons and fathers at a table their grandmothers built. Number 1. Sunday gravy. At the top of the list is the meal that held the entire world together, the Sunday gravy. A pot of tomato sauce set on the stove before church, simmering low all morning while sausages, meatballs, braciole, pork ribs, and bones cooked down into it, perfuming the whole building until you could smell Sunday from the street. The cheap cuts of meat gave their flavor to the sauce and grew tender in return. Then the macaroni went in, and the family gathered, sometimes a dozen people, sometimes 30, around one long table. This was not a meal. It was the law of the family made edible. You did not miss Sunday gravy. You did not skip it for business, for a woman, for anything. The cheapest pork bones and a few cans of tomatoes fed the entire bloodline for almost nothing. And around that table, with a spoon in one hand and bread in the other, every man in the underworld remembered the one thing that came before the money: the territory and the blood. The family ate first. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week. Just one. The escarole and beans, the sausage and peppers, the Sunday gravy. Set the table, fill the bowls, and call somebody to sit down with you. Then come back and tell me which one your family already made without ever calling it mob food, because half of these were probably on your grandmother's stove too. Drop the dish you are making in the comments. I want to know if the Sunday gravy gets more love than the cannoli, because these were never just the meals of the underworld. They were the meals of every Italian kitchen in America, and that is why nobody could ever take them away.